Now, lifeadministration.com presents the Life Administration Podcast. Here are your hosts, Leslie Loftus and Ryan Taylor.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Life Administration Podcast. My name is Ryan Talon, and with me, as always, is Leslie Loftus.
Hello, everyone.
This is episode 16, Critical Thinking, aka, these days, how to slog through fake news.
Yep.
Right?
That's basically what you typically would use it for these days.
You know what I think is, like, this wasn't even a term 3 years ago. Like, I never even heard
Fake news?
Yeah, I never even heard that term until more recently, we'll say.
I think it became popularized then.
Really?
But yeah, there've been anyway. We'll
Right.
talk about that later. What we're talking about now is being able to assess information that comes in, whether it be news or something else, so that you can make better informed decisions in your own life, be it trying to be an active and involved member in your community, or if you're just trying to figure out, well, is this food study really, do I really need to change how my family eat? You know, all of this stuff does matter. It is the background information. You need to be able to assess some of this information coming in.
You know, a little
So
bit
it's
of
your cheat sheets.
yeah, I mean, a little bit of a commentary
Hacks.
here, and is that I don't even necessarily know that I was concerned about it, and now I feel like I hear that term so often, like on the daily. Honestly, on the daily, hear about fake news, and so I think, like, I don't even really know, like, what that means. Like, how can news be fake? You know what I mean? Like, how is that?
Oh, well, if it's wrong.
Right. But I think that's the point, is like, if I'm, you know, and maybe, you know, kids are smarter than I was back in the day, I'm sure, but like 22 years old, when I put the news on, or I read the paper or whatever, like I had zero sort of idea of the bias in maybe particular things, or the agenda for certain publications or TV shows. Like, I mean, didn't even cross my radar until I was probably like, well, honestly, until I started to care, you know,
Right.
like realistically,
Well,
like
and you're
28,
also
29, 30.
smack dab in the age group when critical thinking is another one of those things that used to be taught more at school, and isn't anymore.
Yeah.
And so people in your age cohort, it's not that unusual that this is not core curriculum anymore. Critical thinking, logic, fallacies used to be more of the curriculum. Now it's not so much. So there's really no reason until you started care why you would think, oh, well, if it's said on TV, or if it's said in the news,
Must be right.
must be right.
Yep.
Or, you know, what as the old joke goes, oh, well, I read it on the internet.
Right.
You know, when in my day it was, you know, oh, you read it in Reader's Digest. No, that doesn't necessarily mean. Reader's Digest was this little magazine that my grandparents got.
Did it have a storied history of not necessarily being accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
And kind of in an odd sort of almost inquirer, but not as sensationalist kind of way.
Got it.
But you know how you see a theory about anything on the internet.
Yep.
No matter what you decide, oh, you know, I want to read about this. You can find somebody talking about it on the internet. Okay. Reader's Digest was like a small pond version of that. You could find all sorts of just crazy, not necessarily supported by evidence sort of stuff. And so it became, you know, oh, well, it's true. I heard it in Reader's Digest. Kind of like giving evidence saying, oh, well, my cab driver said.
Right.
Kind of that same genre.
Right. Got it. Okay. Anecdotal, not real.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So I know that we're going to go into that a lot, but honestly, like, I'm really excited because I think, listen, this is a critical time, right? No matter what side of the fence you're on politically, you know, this isn't a politics show. We don't like really dive into that so much, but the reality is that you want to be informed in whatever decision you're making.
Well, and it's not just politics too. It's
Right.
things like food science.
Sure.
I mean, that changes every day. One day butter's not good for you. The next day it is.
Yep.
Avocados, eggs, all
Yep.
of them are gone. What you do with kids. You know, oh, well, you have to do it this way. Oh my gosh, you would never do it this way. How do you assess any of this?
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Okay, so let's get going. So where do we start? Like, I mean, to me, that's the big one. So whatever example you want to use, however you want to talk about this, I'll just kind of follow along with you. But where do we start?
One of the quick hacks that I like to use when you are assessing a new source, because one of the things when you find a source that is reliable about something, they tend to be reliable in other things. So pick a topic that you know a lot about. Say for you, it would be anything on music, technical music stuff. Me, maybe I pick something.
You can just call me a nerd.
Okay, fine. Oh, we could pick nerd topics.
Yeah, we could both do that
we
one.
could totally pick nerd topics. I might pick something on a particular area of law that I know quite a bit about and I have some experience with.
Sure.
Okay. Find some story in the publication that you're vetting that talks about that. Now you might have to modify things a little bit because, maybe Rolling Stone might have a lot of stuff about music stuff, but, New York Times may not, whatever.
Right.
So you have to, but find a topic that you know something about and find something that they've reported on that topic. It is amazing how many times you will, if you have expertise, then you're like, oh my gosh, this is BS. Or, oh my gosh, this person really researched, this reporter really researched, really dug in. They know where some of the pitfalls are. They know where some of the sidelines are, the tangents. Or it might be, oh my goodness, I can't believe this publication published this because this is a load of bunk. All right. That can start to set your credibility meter for this is a rag. I'm not going to bother looking at this website again. Or, oh gosh, well, they did some decent reporting on this. Then you might dig a little deeper. That way you can kind of call in, you can find some sources that you trust.
Right.
By the way, this is the same technique that I use when, say, choosing a pediatrician for my kids. I pick a topic that I know something about and I have an opinion on which way I want it to go. And then I ask the doctor about that. And,
right.
And yeah, so it works. Right, works for lots of things. So if you're trying to test something, ask people questions about things that you know the answers to.
So, I mean, I like this idea, and I like to put things in quotable form, because I think it's easy to remember. Okay. So, I want to say follow your instincts. But I feel like it's not 100% right.
Right. Well, it depends on your instincts need to be honed, which is why I'm saying pick an area where you have some expertise because your instincts are going to be better there than they are. Let's say you, musician, worked in corporate world and lifestyle and tech kind of places. You're not going to pick an article on food science or geology to figure out whether or not, because
but how kids learn, for example, like I
you
really
know a lot about that because you're a teacher. You deal with kids all the time. You're a worship leader at church. You deal with kids all the time. You know something about that. So if you're reading an article on that, you're going to know if this person is full of it, if they're making it up, if they've actually done their homework. Right. And that suggests an outlet that wants writers, wants researchers, wants presenters that do their homework. And you can start to adjust how much credibility you give to each of those sources.
And I think too,
it takes time to do this. None of this stuff happens instantly.
And I think also too is like we live in a world, like at the end of every episode, what do we say? Here we are on Twitter. Here's your handle here, right? We live in a world where we can connect to writers very quickly, right? And so you can also use social media as your BS barometer, like
that helps.
Hey, I got a question. What do you think about this writer? They either respond back
later,
or they don't.
Later in some of the vetting, that's something that I'll do. So if I found an article like that, or that I'm wondering, I will also stick the link into Twitter to see how the reaction goes. And then you're paying a little bit more attention to, let's say it's a medical something or other. Well, then the doctors that reply with comments, positive or negative on the article, help me sway what I think about it a little bit more than just general, because you can pop it, like tons of people can say, oh my gosh, I think that's bunk. But if the three, medical doctors that are commenting on it are like actually not so bunk. Oh, well, you get.
Yep, totally.
But again, this takes a little bit of time. And once you find some sources that you generally trust on the things you know something about, well, then you can use
So
them a little
what
bit more.
about like the big entities? So is there a place where we can go and get some news that I sort of understand that everything is going to have a certain amount of bias to it.
Mhm.
We're all human, right? We're gonna write with our feelings a little bit. But is there a place or a website or something that's out there that you can think of that says like this is a really nice place to start?
No, it's
No.
one of the problems. There's not really great curation out there, and to the extent that there is some curation out there, it tends to have an angle.
Yeah.
So like even on Snopes.
What's Snopes for the?
For Snopes,
Well,
that's lots of S's there. Snopes is a debunking website. So say some internet rumor comes up, usually on the internet these days. And so Snopes will go and find out, did that really happen the way that the story is going around? And most of the time, yeah, they're pretty good. But there's been a couple of instances where it's like, they missed some satire.
Yeah.
Right. Again, if you have some experience with that issue, you're like, wow, big miss. So even because I do use Snopes if I'm trying to find out if something actually happened the way that it's being reported, but still you got to take a grain of critical thinking in there. You need to be able to assess it for yourself, which kind of stinks because it takes a little bit of time to do this, which is why we have a few shortcuts and a few things that you can do, especially for articles that contain studies. But yeah, you're going to you need to do some of this yourself because really, I don't know of anything that's just 100% trustworthy.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if you'd ever get there just because, but I just thought maybe, that might be a nice place to start. But just understand.
I know there's a huge desire for something like that.
But the issue with this sort of thing is like you got to follow the money and the money's got to come from somewhere. And so when people are paying for certain things, like there's always going to be a lens that they're looking through that may not be the same lens as yours, whatever. Like,
well, and one of the things that news is dealing with right now is not so much that the money comes from advertisers. And it's not so much that they're looking through the lens of the advertisers that are hiring them, but in order to attract those advertisers, they have to move fast.
Right.
Okay. That means that there's less time for research, there's less time for editing, there's less time for fact checking. And it's really easy to make mistakes when you're going fast.
Absolutely.
And you don't have time to verify. I mean, there are practices going on in newsrooms now that would horrify reporters from 30 years ago.
24-hour news cycle, baby.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's very easy to make mistakes when you're having to move that quickly.
So talk to me a little bit about some basic fallacies.
Okay. Well, one of the things you need to, one of the tools you need to do this work is you need to familiarize yourself with basic fallacies. So these are logic flaws in argument. And there's lots of very typical flaws in arguments. One very popular one is a straw man. So I say something and then you, in reply and in defense, oversimplify my argument or twist my words so that they don't say exactly. They say something that's easier for you to refute.
Sure.
You take my argument and you change it so that obviously who's going to do, I'm like, dude,
that's not what I said.
That's not what I said.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a typical logical fallacy.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but you'll be able to link it. Maybe an example of this would be that interview that you and I looked at probably 4 or 5 months ago. It was like a 23-minute interview, but like the gentleman, like she would like repeat what he says, like that's not what I said.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That would be something worth, because I think like showing an example of like this is what it looks like would be.
I can totally.
I
know exactly which one you're talking about. I can totally link to that one in the show notes.
Yep. That'd be worth just looking at it for 5 minutes to understand.
And I will also have a couple of links to. I've got one link on some basic fallacies that you hear a lot about. Correlation and causation is one thing. Just because two things happen in similar time or right after the other does not mean that the first thing caused the second thing.
Right.
That's a very common fallacy. So some of the common ones, and then I actually have a Stanford philosophy entry that discusses the history of fallacies and some of the more formal fallacies for anybody that wants to do a little bit more deep dive into this stuff. But familiarizing yourself with the basic fallacies that are out there helps you spot them.
Yes. I think one that I've seen is anecdotal, but then backed up by yet another story.
Yes,
so I think
the plural of anecdote is not data.
Yeah, right. Right. So yeah, you get this person that says a story and blah 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 blah, and this is why it's true. And then, by the way, let me tell you something else, right? And then this guy said, and like that's still the same thing, right? But because more words are used, all of a sudden the subject might be convinced.
Right. Well, and also, some people are very, very good at persuasion and know how to use language to make it sound more convincing, and to, slowly and stair step you so that you don't notice, okay, well, this one was just anecdote, and then this was backed up by a light appeal to authority. That's another fallacy. Just because somebody of some authority says it does not necessarily mean that it's true without other evidence. You can slowly, and the next thing you know, you've gotten into something completely and totally false because you've just taken little tiny steps, 3 or 4, and you're off.
Yep, totally. So we also talk about looking how a study might be conducted.
Right. Okay. So there's a hierarchy of studies, and this is one of pretty much anything except straight up reporting of, say, an event. So this happened at this event, and this person interviewed this one, and this person said, if you have straight reporting like that. But if you have a study, and there's tons of articles that you'll read that have a survey of something or other, study this, look at that, or, oh gosh, it turns out broccoli causes cancer, Okay, first of all, hint number 1, anytime there's the word cause, X causes Y, in a headline, there are very few things that studies show causation for. Mm-hmm. Okay. Causation is hard to prove. Correlation is easy, and correlation is sometimes heavily overlapped. Correlation is not, it is something we want to look at when something we pay attention to. Correlation means something, but it is not causation.
Okay, time out.
So usually when they're stating cause, they're overstating.
Give us 30 seconds on causation and correlation. Just like draw out the what are these things? Like I get it from the context, but drill down a little bit for me.
So causation is I do something and I flip that light switch, and it causes the light to come on.
Got it.
Okay.
I'm on board.
Correlation is, let's see, I'm trying to think of a good correlate.
Not to put you on the spot here, but.
Oh, I know. Well, you put me on the spot. And I'm sorry. The ones that I'm coming up with are all controversial because this is the ones that I know the most about. Correlation is when two things tend to happen simultaneously or one after the other. And so people assume, because I walked up the stairs and the lights came on, maybe there's a motion detector, that it must be something in the stairs.
Right.
Because, anytime I step on the stairs, no, it's something. Now, it does so happen that it has something to do with you walking up the stairs because there's a motion detector here. Or, no, I've got a better one. You're standing up here, and as I walk upstairs, you happen to turn on the light.
Yep.
Okay. And because I'm coming upstairs and we're getting ready to get started. And I think because my walking upstairs was immediately followed by the light coming on, I assume that my walking on the stairs caused the light to go on.
Sure.
When in fact, there's an intervening thing that you were already up here and you hit the switch just as I was coming up the stairs.
Yep. Got it. Okay. Makes perfect sense. I just think that was worth sort of drawing out because the cause and effect piece, I think people understand, but just because I flipped the light switch upstairs and I heard the water go on downstairs doesn't mean that they're related.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Right. The reality is something else had causation for that water to go on. But because I'm sort of limited by my own perception, my own filters, I assume that that these two things are related, even though there isn't actually any evidence to say they are related.
Or what often happens too is the correlate is actually a stand-in for the real cause.
Okay.
So the thing correlates, and it can kind of point you to what is actually causing the event to happen, but the correlate is not it itself.
Yep.
Right.
And I think a lot of times when it comes to these types of studies is that you can find what you're looking for if you're using correlation. Is that you can use and manipulate and put words around something that is like, this is why we got here, right? It's like, well, I mean, maybe not,
Exactly.
So, okay, great. Perfect. So we talk about looking into how a study was conducted.
Right. No, we're still on hierarchy of studies.
Yeah,
we
we
need to go
sure
through
are.
that. So
We sure are.
when you find an article that has any sort of study or survey and stuff, you need to assess what kind it is. And I'll rank these from least credible, least reliable to most reliable. So first of all, anecdote. My Aunt Petunia in Spokane, Washington did X. So clearly X is true. It's not necessarily untrue, but
It's not false, but it's not, let's build a study off of Aunt
So,
Petunia.
Right. So that's just an anecdote, just one story, not much evidence for whatever proposition is being lifted up. 2, you have self-reporting. So some group sends out a survey and people write back the answers on the survey. Okay. It's not, let's say they sent it to 1,000 people. Okay. It's not nothing. It's, it is some information, but self-reported studies are kind of low on the thing, especially if they don't have, because we don't know if they had general definitions at the top. Did they have multiple check, so it was multiple choice, so everybody had to answer with the same words, or were they using their own words? And then that was being interpreted. Is it voluntary reporting? Voluntary reporting is a big one, because if you do, what are the chances, let's say we had voluntary reporting in medicine.
Right.
Okay. And so doctors only had to report, they were supposed to report when surgeries went wrong. What are the chances that they report more often when the surgeries go well, and either understate or underreport in general when things go bad?
Absolutely.
Right. So self-reporting, voluntary is lower on it's not no data, but it's a bit lower on the totem pole.
And so as someone that worked in the corporate world for a while, and that bosses had told me to use self-reporting techniques or things to manage my subordinates, sometimes you get this information back and you go, ain't no way. Like, it's just, this is not right. But this is what they reported,
right,
boss. So it goes in there and muddies up the rest of the data.
Right.
I'm so frustrated with self-reporting. I think to me, it's like the same as anecdotal. Honestly, like I don't think people are honest. Like
a lot of statisticians think the same thing.
Yep.
And I mean, it's just, and interestingly enough, there's a lot of women's medical data that relies on self-reporting.
And I think there is too much pressure in society to look a certain way, be a certain way. And even though it's like some study or whatever, people don't want to expose who they actually are for whatever reason, right? Because we got issues with vulnerability in
or
our
they'll
society.
just underreport the bad stuff.
Exactly. Because they want it to look a certain way. They want to feel good, right? Whatever. So, moving on.
So if the story is a self-reported story, lots of grains of salt, full shaker. Single blind study. So a single blind study. So most studies are conducted where you have a controlled group that's taking, they're drinking water. We're trying to, they're drinking water. They're taking a placebo. They're taking an inactive agent.
Yep.
And then there's another group that's taking the active, that's getting the actual experiment. So you can compare how the control group, a single blind study is when the participants don't know who's in the placebo group or who's in the control group and who's in the active group. Okay. Again, you can get some data out of that, but then it's not as good as the next one. How about this? We'll just go up to the next one. A double blind study is when the participants don't know who's in the control group and the active group, and the study conductors don't know who's in the control group and the active group.
Right.
Okay. That way it removes so much more bias that because we don't have a self-reporting problem. And now we also don't have an assumption problem on, because everybody has their own biases. Everybody has their own theories about, So you remove a lot of that subjective, well, they're in the control group, so I think that they, so maybe I'll score that down a little bit more or score it up a little bit more depending on context. So a double blind study has a much higher credibility rating than a single blind study. After that, you start to get into more considerations like a study of 50 people is not nearly so valuable as a study of 5,000 people.
Right.
Then you also need to look at things like if we're doing a study on the efficacy of certain drugs, say, well, I'm actually more interested in a study that broke out men, women, and different races, because different biologies react differently to different drugs, than one that threw them all in the same pile. So now you're getting a little bit more into context, but once you're into double-blind studies, you're getting into some pretty good, credible stuff. Then the real cream of the one you want is meta studies. And this is a study of studies. So there have been 200 studies on father absence in early childhood, let's say. No one of those studies is nearly as interesting to me as a study that looks at 150 of those and starts to pick out trends from what it sees of different ones. So if you're seeing a report, a story that is talking about a meta study, a study of studies, now you're getting into some pretty serious reporting, and somebody's really paid attention.
Yep.
And somebody's doing some heavy research and going, because it is really easy to find, one study that proves the point that you want to prove. It's really hard to fake a meta study, especially once you start to get north of a dozen or so studies.
Right.
You can't manipulate the data as well in a meta study as you can in a single study.
So it's almost like there are rare cases in my life where I'll say this, but I'm going to say this now. There's no such thing as too much data when it comes to a study.
I'll go with that, basically. You can muddy it up a bit, but yes.
I retract my previous statement.
No. Even that's fine. Sorry, I'm being overly.
I know you put your lawyer brain on, and you got data in there. Yeah, I totally get it, but I think for the average person, like if you see something, you say, okay, well, this is a meta study, I'm good. This is a double-blind study. If it's a topic that you know something about that you're interested in, you're probably good. After that, it's more of
you're getting down into anecdotal level,
And now you're relying more on your gut and on your impressions. Maybe also who did the study, like that has some credibility. Where was it financed from? That sort of stuff. Those are things that you want to be paying attention to.
You need to pay a lot more attention to those, because there's a lot of devil in the detail things that can go there.
You got to start somewhere. So typically, maybe you did hear a story from Aunt Petunia, and then that all of a sudden launched you into looking up this single blind study. And then the single blind study, you're like, oh, that was pretty interesting. So now you're looking at meta studies of that, right? So
and by the way, you can't search for these terms. It's not like you can say, meta study on X topic. Not likely that you're going to get a whole lot of hits on that. So you kind of have to pay attention. Here's the other thing that you'll find in news articles and writing on anything like this. The less information they're willing to, or that they put in the article about the study sourcing and the study methodology, the more likely it's lower on the credibility scale. People that are reporting on meta studies tend to let you know that, by the way, this is a study of studies. There's, we were looking at 20 different studies conducted over 15 years and came up with, and this is the conclusion that the people came up with. If they have that kind of information, they're advertising it.
I have a story. It just came to me.
Good.
It just came to me. So as you know, I am an avid wrestling fan.
He is.
I'm an avid wrestling fan. But I am also a businessman. And so I get very interested in their quarterly financial calls, right? So I typically, as soon as someone posts a transcript, I kind of pour over it because I'm just interested. So here's this company that's patting themselves on the back because the hours of engagement is up on the network. This is such a great correlation thing.
Excellent.
They're so, all right. Everyone on Wall Street's high-fiving. Hey man, look at this amazing content that we're producing. Everyone's watching for 6 hours this month instead of 4 hours. Ahaha. I'm a huge wrestling fan. WrestleMania, which is the biggest show in the world, right? 2 years ago was 4 hours long. Last year, it was 5 hours long. This year, it was 6 hours long.
So maybe it doesn't have anything to do.
It has zero to do with engagement on the network. You just took the biggest show you had and made it
2 hours
50% longer.
Yep.
So, and your numbers went up 50%. Now, someone that doesn't understand or that's not in wrestling,
Excellent example.
they don't get it. They're like, wow, this stock is doing great and got in hours of engagement. Now, if you ask them, okay, what about your house show attendance? How many people are actually showing up to the place and buying a ticket? Well, that's down. We're not going to talk about that. Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about TV ratings. Well, TV ratings, they've been going down. You say, well, what's your trend against maybe other live TV shows? Are the trends the same? Well, no, we don't talk about that. We're talking about hours of active engagement. So
they're talking about the one thing that they
can dress this baby up.
There's a correlation. It's not
Exactly.
actually the cause is the 2 additional hours.
The cause is the 2 additional hours, and we just make the show longer for the show's sake because we want to excite Wall Street, even if it doesn't actually mean anything.
Right.
So,
and now, by the way, so any Wall Street analyst or stock analyst that you see that are like, oh my gosh, this is such great news. What do you think of, like, if you were to run into them recommending something else?
Yeah,
to
I would go,
again?
you obviously, you don't know.
Ding.
Essentially what has happened is you're eating what you're fed and you're high-fiving. You're saying, that's great.
Right.
Okay, great.
Right.
But
So when it comes up to something else that you don't know as much about, you're not going to take that person's advice because the thing you did know about, you knew that they were just eating the party line.
Exactly.
Yep.
There we go. Okay. So I hope
that was a great 30-second
yes.
interruption.
Yes. A good commercial break. Okay. So we're talking now about how to vet a story. We've sort of kind of gone back and forth in this, and what do we need to do to vet a story properly?
Okay, first of all, you've spent some time hopefully figuring out the sources that you trust. So if it's on one of your not trusted sources, or make that assessment.
Right.
That's part of the vetting. Look at the type of evidence that they give. Is it anecdotal evidence? Is it self-reported evidence? What kind of studies is it? Now, once you've figured out what kind of studies it is, my favorite thing to do, okay, when a study is presented or published, they stick an abstract up at the top. They do this with law cases as well. So an abstract is basically the summary of, because some of these studies can be hundreds of pages long.
Right,
and then
right.
that's
Yeah.
not including the indexes with the actual raw data. So it's a paragraph or two basically stating what is the base. A lot of those abstracts are molded to, maybe we want to get more publicity. Maybe we want to kind of do the same. Okay. So first thing to do is go look at the story, go to the then click through onto the study, look at the abstract and see if the abstract lines up with what the story is actually reporting. Sometimes it gets lost right there and you're like, that's not what the abstract says. But my favorite thing to do, and where I catch most finagling with PR for studies, click through the actual study and read the intro to the study and read the conclusion to the study. And there's a whole lot of times that the abstract does not line up well, does not well represent what the study actually found.
Good. That's good.
And that actually doesn't take that long.
That's a 2-minute job.
It's a 2-minute job. Sometimes you run into a problem if it's behind a paywall for a research thing, but then you can probably find, you can search around maybe for an expert. Maybe somebody else has already done that. But see if the abstract to the study lines up with the intro and the conclusion.
Yeah.
If you have more interest beyond that, then you can go start to dig into the actual study itself. But that's a pretty quick cheat for how to look at those. And then I had another one on there that I can't remember off the top of my head.
Other takes?
Yes. Go and look at other reporters' takes, other outlets' takes. See if there's a car accident and there's 4 witnesses to a car accident. Each person is going to have a slightly different perspective, if only because they were looking at it from different directions. Each one of them might have an extra bit or two of information that the others didn't see. Christians know the 4 Gospels. Huge example of that. Some that like this story is in 2 books, this story is in 3 books. But all of them will be somewhat consistent. Even the different perspectives of the 4 people that witnessed the accident will generally be, you'll be able to kind of line them up, more or less consistent with each other. Okay. Same thing for any story you're looking at. The other outlets that are reporting on it, you should see some basic consistencies. And just think of the car accident. What kind of things might you hear from the lady across the street versus the person that was in the car versus the one in the coffee shop on the other side of the street,
Awesome.
Right.
And
And then like I said earlier, I plug the link into Twitter, and I kind of see how experts or industry insiders are reacting to the piece.
yeah. And to me, that one is not sort of like an end all be all, because
No.
it's very possible for the majority to be wrong about something. And so like you got to keep that in mind. However, it does give you an idea of like, these are the things I should be looking for in maybe other stories too.
Well, and like maybe people sorry, not sure what Reagan got into, but okay. You all right, sweetheart?
Dog break.
Dog break. Okay. It could be maybe everybody that is reacting negatively to the story is reacting with straw man arguments.
Right.
In which case, I'm kind of like, that means they don't really have any actual arguments against the story. So even though on Twitter, the story is getting slammed, to me, its credibility has gone right up because
no one's refuting. They're just angry.
Right. They're just angry about it. That's a good piece of information for assessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some story.
So now it goes beyond just vetting a story. It goes beyond sort of just checking your sources. These are techniques that you can apply everywhere in your life.
Right. Yeah. Right? Earlier I described, this is how I pick a doctor.
Right.
There's all sorts of things that you can use these critical thinking skills for.
Right. So I think for me, if we're trying to like sum it up, like, okay, we're
Ryan
rewind
likes to sum things up.
Well, I like
his job.
Yeah. When I walk away from getting, a 35-minute piece of information, I want to walk away with go-dos.
Right.
I'm a big these are my go-dos, right? So my go-do is like, if you're not an expert on something, find something that you're passionate about and start to become an expert about that. I think that's number one, honestly, like in the whole scheme of things, get some expertise in something, then be able to draw that against other experts.
Right.
Now that I have this expertise, I'm now able to kind of go into studies or articles, right? And I can start questioning things like, is this a straw man argument? What kind of study do we actually have? Are there metadata studies? Is this the first time anyone's ever studied this before?
Right.
These sorts of things, right? And I think what it allows you to do is that you're questioning. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the take home is like, now you have this ability to question things where you didn't necessarily have it before.
Right. You're not blindly believing everything you read on the internet. And that includes all of it.
Right. The difference of me turning on a cable news network when I was 22 versus what I now consider news in 2019, they're two totally different things, right? Like, I didn't have the life experience or the knowledge, or I didn't have the people around in my life that could speak to me about these things. I mean, how many times have I come to you? I think this is another good piece of advice. Like, in my book, you're an expert on a lot of different things. And I have come to you and said, hey, I read this. I saw this.
Absolutely.
I'm not clear on it. I'm not necessarily sure.
Well, how many times have I done that with you on something musical?
Totally.
I've kicked this
100%.
or something tech, and I'm like, translate this, please. Yep. I've done it to my sister-in-law in medicine. I've done it to my sister-in-law in accounting. Even if you're not the expert, you can send, okay, this intrigued, a girlfriend of mine is an architect. And so and she does urban planning. So I come up with something I'm like, hello, assess this for me.
Yeah, definitely. Like you are allowed to have your own quote unquote panel of experts, right? And these are people that you know and that you trust. Very cool. Very cool. I think that about does it, honestly, for this episode, unless you have some other things that you want to talk about here.
Nope, I'm sure we'll probably have some questions on this one. And like I said, pick up the links below. There's some are a little bit lighter reading, some are a bit heavier chapters of philosophy books kind of reading. But, I figured...
Socrates.
Actually.
It was a joke, but I guess not. Sorry about that, guys. You'll be reading Harvard philosophy.
Actually, it's commentary on Socrates and Aristotle, but okay.
Like I said, an expert.
Some people want to become an expert, so I've hit the high and the low, and
Did you just call me low? I'm kidding.
not
I'm
what
kidding.
I meant.
Hey, for what it's worth, this is the end of the day for us. We've
It
been
is.
going
We
for
have
a long time
yes,
today.
and this is day 2 as
Yep,
well.
in a
So
row.
this is our 7th episode in
Yep.
24 hours. I think we're a little fried.
A little
we
fried.
can give ourselves a break.
Yep, but a lot of fun. So with that, guys, we're gonna close it out. As always, if you have questions, I'm sure questions,
Absolutely.
concerns, issues, and even if it's just something you want us to talk about, like
Mhm.
we are totally willing to do that. So please go ahead and you can shoot that to me over on Twitter at Ryan Tailon, RyanTaillon.
And I am Leslie Loftus, text TX on Twitter, but mostly I will hang out on the website.
Yep. So feel free to comment, and we will pick you guys up there. Other than that, we will see you in the next one. Bye, y'all. Have a good day.